Here, if you don't like the talk, blame him. Basically, what he said after the last meeting, we wrote in the comment. If it's even possible, I'd like to see the talk on structuring code for Meteor, e.g. controls or no controls, looking through repos on GitHub and styles varied so widely that it's hard to grasp whether one way is better than the other. And so I basically joked and said, hey, we already found a volunteer. And 1 month later, it's not him standing here, but actually me. So, I mean, Meteor is not very opinionated, which means you're free to do whatever you want. You can basically put everything in one file, or 2 files, one for the template, one for the JavaScript. And or you could just have 10 folders deep and structure everything magnificently, and you will never find your stuff that you actually look. So solving that, just first you have to understand what your application actually requires. So what are you trying to build? Are you trying to build a small application, single page application, or a huge massive application with multiple subcomponents and several sections, multiple views and all that stuff? So what I'm trying to do, give a baseline for almost any project that reaches a certain complexity where you can't just put everything in one file anymore. And from there on, you can start even structuring it even better, or trying to create subfolders and to put certain features into certain subdirectories. A word of warning though, this is highly opinionated. This is my experience with working with Meteor applications. We've been working with that for half a year now. Got about 10 or 15 projects done, most of them small, a couple of larger ones as well. So there's a huge variety, which means we had a couple of use cases, and this kind of boilerplate, this kind of structure fits typically 80%, I would say. I also prepared a boilerplate template for, you can basically just clone it on GitHub. And if you want to actually contribute to it, so that's completely open, and I'm more than happy to discuss certain details of what to add, where to create another folder, how to structure it even better, or which guidelines to follow. So what does the boilerplate give you? First of all, especially important for probably beginner developers, is folder structure, which just gives you a basic set of locations. This is where you put that code, this is where you put that code, this is where you put that code. You follow that and you'll always find your stuff easily, and also should be relatively easy to navigate through that. A couple of useful packages. Everyone will have a different selection of packages. There's so many out there. A lot of them quite amazing, and I just selected a few of them which I think are relatively essential, and a few of them more optional for specific use cases. Real functionality comes in with global template helpers and CSS helpers, where I try to say, okay, I always have this form, and you know you have a form value that's required, and you have the star, the red star right next to it. Why not just write a CSS class that does everything for me, and just add that and never have to worry about it anymore? And the same goes for global template helpers. I think in the first project I wrote an equals helper probably about 20 or 30 times in 10 different views. So every drop-down that I have, when I want to pre-select a certain value, I always had some helper behind that, determining if that value is actually selected. And it was usually just an equals operation comparing two strings. So why not have a generic? There's a couple of others there as well, like determining the size of an area or a collection, stuff like that. Tons of documented example code is also included, so especially if you're a beginner, each folder contains a demo file which just contains the rough content of that particular file, and then you can just follow the pattern and you should be okay, even with larger projects. Obviously, some example routes as well, and I got into a little bit with subscriptions and publications, which I know is a little bit tricky and probably the stuff that takes a while to understand. Route-based subscriptions, how to use a loading template while your subscription is being put into the client, and all that stuff. I just realized I haven't started recording.
Yeah, so it includes some basic routes as well, then basically some collection declaration, and I also added schemas, so you need a separate package for that, but I highly recommend everyone to use schemas for your collections because it just adds a lot of robustness to your application. Basically how it works is you declare your schema, and every insert or update operation will check against that schema if it's not violated, and if it's violated it will just prevent the insert operation or the update operation and give you a nice meaningful error which says this is missing or that is missing. So makes your application more robust. And obviously you have views on the client side, And on the server side, you have fixtures and data migration, basically your initialization of the database when you first set up your application. So in terms of folder structure, what Meteor gives to you is basically just a couple of special folders that have a special handling. So obviously, you have a test folder which contains the test, you have a private folder which is not visible to the client, you have a public folder which contains your client assets like fav icons, header banners, or some other images that you use throughout your application. Maybe even fonts. Then you have a server folder which is code that's only visible to the server side, and you have a client folder which contains code that's only available for the client side. And obviously inside the client, the compatibility folder, but I get to that in a second. Now, from that picture, what's missing? Well, the folder for the shared code, right? So you have a folder for client code, you have a folder for server code. Why not have a shared code folder? So I'll just add that, and inside what I do is I define my models, which is declaring my collections and the schemas, and declaring the routes, because those are the ones that I want to be available on both client and server. And I found that you really don't need more. If you have any more functionality, feel free to add another folder for your functionality or for your area of functionality. Now, on the server side, we have primarily 3 folders, one for the initialization, so that contains all the fixtures, the system initialization, say when the server starts up, what do? Do you make an API call somewhere to register yourself as an agent, or do you initialize some other environment, make some API call, whatever. Then another folder for methods, server-side methods I found very useful because you can separate logic a little bit, so in the client, in a certain event handler, when you submit a form, just grabs data out of the form, puts it in a JSON object and sends it to the server, and the server actually handles the manipulation of that data and converting it into an actual database record and then performing the insert. I found that a very useful mechanism to use because you can really separate your concerns nicely, and throughout the entire boilerplate you will find the separation of concerns where you declare your data here and you use it there. Don't mix it into each other because it makes maintenance so much harder if you mix everything in one case. And obviously on the server side you also have the publications. Now if you have a very small project with a small database, use auto-publish, don't worry about the publications, but if you need, if your database is intended to grow, then you need publication on the server side as well. On the client side, we have the views folder, which basically contains all my templates, my CSS, and JavaScript helpers and the event handlers. An init folder, which usually stays fairly small. You could put everything in one file, because usually on the client side you don't initialize too much. What you would find there is just close subscriptions and maybe some calling the server and finding out which server environment you're running on, development or production. And compatibility, I mentioned earlier, it's a special folder used by Meteor to solve compatibility issues. So basically, if you have a library that provides a certain function, and then you use that function later on in the code, if you don't put it in the compatibility folder but somewhere else, there's a risk that your functionality is loaded first. And it says, well, I can't resolve that function, I don't know it yet. And that's what the compatibility folder is for. So to put stuff in there that needs to be initialized before you actually start with your business logic and all the stuff behind it. So another nice thing to put into the compatibility folder is third-party libraries. Now, agreed, the best way would probably be to use some package, because then you don't have to worry about all that stuff. But I had a few issues where I once wanted to include an Excel library and there was only an NPM module available, and then it couldn't be properly loaded, there was some other thing missing. So I just went to the project page, downloaded a JavaScript file, put it into the lib folder inside the compatibility folder, job done. Worked, and that's at the end all you want. Right? It's not about being fancy about it, it's just making something to work. And as I said before, client initialization is basically environment and global subscription. So for instance, the client usually doesn't know if it's a development or production environment. So what I do at the beginning is just make a server call. The server reads the process variable, finds out which type of the environment it is, sends it back to the client, and the client stores it in the session. You will always have it available, just as an example of what you could put there. Views, I guess this is going to be a base for discussion because the interpretation of the word view can be quite different. So I'm not a big fan of MVC, and I know that Meteor is using some sort of MVC, although it's not explicitly done like that. For me, a view is basically a template. If we have reusable views that you use multiple times, say for instance a tile that renders something and you just use the same template over and over, for me that would be a view. Each of those templates would be a view as well, and obviously the entire page a view as well. Just as a tiny example, inside that views folder I would have certain subfolders, and for instance if you look at the login HTML, that would declare a template called login. I try to keep the naming convention equal, so the file name actually says what it contains, and the folder name as well. That makes it fairly easy when you search for your code. You know exactly, I want the login template. You just type in login HTML, and there's your template. Don't bother about trying to name your files different as the template or the instances that are in it. It's just, you will never find this stuff. And a little bit of a word of warning here though. So as your application grows, at the beginning you have your one level underneath views where you just have login, header, dashboard, and a couple of others. Now, after 10 or 15, yes?
The file section.
I'll get to that in a second. After 10 or 15 of those views, you will find that you look at the folder and you're like, where was the one that I'm looking for? I think up to an amount of 15 per folder. You can still look at it immediately and say, there is my file, there's my folder, this is what I'm looking for. That makes it very, very quick to navigate through your source tree. So as soon as you get more than 10 or 15 items, sometimes might be more depending on the exact situation, just create a subfolder, structure it deeper, because then it's justified. But don't. I worked in my old job, and we had this huge application, and this one folder just contained 1,200 files. You never find your stuff, and then eventually they started nesting it, and suddenly it was much easier. In the file section, I put those in the root folder, in the views folder. I basically just have a common less files. I'm using, just as a hint here, less is basically the same as CSS for those of you who don't know, just with a little bit of extended functionality. I find it amazingly useful. And since I first used it, I use it for every single project since then. Common less basically defines global styles. So I reuse this kind of tile on almost every single page, right? And I want it to look always the same. Obviously, I put it in a general file and not a few specific file. Variables, a feature of less, where you can basically declare stuff like your brand color or certain dimensions that repeat over and over. And that makes it very, very easy. For instance, with the brand color, I use that extensively. And you just change one line of code, and your application everywhere changes its color because you're reusing that variable everywhere. Global helpers and global events is basically what it says. So global helpers are the ones like equal helper or size of or is empty. The typical operations that otherwise you would implement in your view. Just make it generic enough. I'm not saying that they are perfect and they accommodate for everything. You have to look at the implementation to see what you can actually pass into those helpers. But I think it's a good starting point.
So these are the files that are at the top level of the views folder.
Yes. So to quickly illustrate that, So, pressing those. So this is my views folder here, basically. So I have a subfolder for admin views. Inside there, there's a couple of other subfolders which have all my admin views. And I have a dashboard, a header, loading, login, and then there are my files on the same level, basically. Just since we're in the code, quickly to show you the variables. So this is basically how they're declared. You just declare them, and then you can reuse them everywhere. And stuff like colors are a good example, and also dimensions if you need them.
Just have a quick look at the global events file.
So okay, this is what I mean with documented examples. What I'm trying to do is here, I explain, okay, this is what it contains, and this is an example. I commented it out because that doesn't exist. And but this basically says, okay, this is how you would put your events in, and I'm using standard jQuery events. There's maybe another way to do that, using global events, but I found I used it once for context menu, for instance. So if you right-click somewhere and you open a context menu with jQuery, no problem. But how do you detect if the user clicks outside of that context menu? As long as he clicks somewhere inside a template, you kind of have a way to figure it out. But what if he clicks outside of your main div, your main container, which contains all the content outside? There's a little gap there. When you click on it, you just click on the body. And I couldn't find a hook for that. That's why I included it mainly. So if anyone knows a way to do that.
I use the layout.
The what?
The layout template. And just put event handlers into the layout template.
If you click on the body, does that get triggered as well?
I have a layout that's like global, contains everything.
Oh, because you're using full width.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In that case, you could put it in the layout template, exactly. Yeah. I was quickly going through the layout template. Usually what I do is not declaring more than one template in a file. With the layout file, I tend to handle it a little bit different. So basically, in here I define my header, because it's kind of layout related. With layout and header is kind of the frame for your application. And inside I have, at the moment, just one template. You could declare other templates and use them in your routes. Also try to do a little bit like with login. So if you're logged in, you see a little bit more complex layout. And if you're not logged in, you just see the yield. In that case, would probably be the login form full screen. Okay, so let's get quickly back to that. Yeah. Right. So that's the client folder.
So yield was another template?
Yield is a reserved word, and you can basically define the yield with your router. So if you say inside your routing function, you say this render login, then login, the template login, is your yield template, and it just gets pushed in there. And it's just a placeholder, basically. Server side. In here, mentioned before, we have the init folder, which for me usually just includes the fixtures and db migrate if you're running production environment and you need to eventually migrate data. Important for those, they always rerun, so make sure that they already check if that data that you want to insert is already there, or say if a collection is empty, only then insert objects and stuff like that. Methods folder, so as I said earlier, what I like to do is in the client, in my event, just pull the data out of the form and send it raw to the server, and then the server does all the transformation, all the logic inside a method. So basically for every business object I have a separate file, which, for instance, if I have a business object category, I have a category.js, and it defines a method called create category, update category, remove category, and maybe get something or some other operation, or resort children or something like that. Whatever comes to mind. And here again, if you have too many files, group them together, create a subfolder, and put them in there. And the same thing, if you have a business object that has a lot of functionality, you might want to split it up as well, because don't get the files too big.
And just with that separation of concerns and grabbing everything raw on the client and sending it all to the server.
Yeah.
Do you find then that you tend to go around the allow deny callbacks? And do you tend to use Meteor methods rather than allow deny?
I'm using methods. I usually don't put any insert code or update code into the client. Okay. It's probably a little bit wasting Meteor's capabilities, but I found it a little bit easier to just say, okay, this is related to the event handler, which pulls the data from the form. This is related to my DOM structure, not to my data structure. My data structure is managed somewhere else. So I basically just, if I want to change my data structure somehow, right, all I need today to do is change the server part. I don't have to touch the client code, which means I can rely on it still working. And it's also in your mindset. You don't have to look through all the animations that you might fire in your JavaScript code on the client side. And in the midst of it, here I'm firing an animation, then I transform this into that, then I pull some other information in here, and then I render another animation. It mixing things up and makes it very, very hard to read and harder to maintain as well.
But you're losing the latency compensation capability to
A little bit, I agree.
Yeah, there's also the ability to move methods so that they can be isomorphic.
Sorry, what?
The methods can be run in the simulation on the client side as well.
Okay.
That's useful.
That could be interesting. Yeah, I mean, I still would like to have two different code sections: one for grabbing the data and one for transforming into my final structure. Yeah, I mean, definitely, there's definitely other ways around that. So yeah, that sounds actually quite good to do the method stuff on the client side.
I think we also mostly use methods instead of allow deny in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think
just it allows you to be a lot more specific around the rules about what things can be validated and what things affect other things.
Yeah, exactly. You might have also different rules for. I don't forget about what. Just follow the thought again. Wait. So methods and obviously publications, and here I also try to do publications for one collection in one file, and you have another collection, even if it just has one publication, put it in a separate file. It makes it easier to find, and maybe even use a naming convention like a prefix pub underscore your collection name, or even without it. I think that's how I do it. I call a publication for the category collection, just call it pub categories, and you will always find it so quickly. Those questions.
A real newbie sort of question. And you can have more than one publication for a collection.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so imagine the case. You have a list of 500 blog articles, right?
Okay.
So obviously you could publish all 500 blog articles, but that means the user accesses your website and has to download all 500.
Yeah.
So in the production system that I'm running at the moment, we have a database of 3 or 4 megs, right? And you don't want to download it every single time you access the page. It's about your bandwidth, basically. So especially if you're on G3, you will be thankful if the developer actually used multiple different publications. So, for instance, you can pass a parameter to a publication and say how many items you want. So that's how you implement pagination. So, yeah.
Cool.
All right, server side, again, same principle as with the publication, one file per collection, attaching the schema to it, and maybe even some hooks. Do keep in mind that those two functionalities basically require additional packages. This requires all these collection 2, and this one requires metlb. Get to that in a second. Some collection hooks, basically. As for the routes, I differentiate between small application and large application. So the boilerplate only contains one file for the routes. Define your 10, 15, 20 routes in one file. It's fine. The file won't exceed 300, 400 lines, even if you have very complex logic and a lot of subscription stuff going on. But if you get a larger application, try splitting up maybe the admin routes, the main routes, which is the front-end routes, and the API routes, which would be for web services, basically. And if you get even more than that, well, just add more files. Which brings me to the package section. So packages, this is basically the pre-selection that I put in there. I have to say, though, that the last 3 here, I think, are optional in a way. They are very use case specific. So why would you introduce C3 if you don't need a chart in your entire app? I mean, C3, for instance, is just based on D3. D3 and C3 together, I don't have an exact number. They're probably about 100 or 200K. So they make your application a little bit more heavy. So don't include them unless you need them. In the core, I basically have less as a replacement for CSS. Although it's not entirely correct, because less files, they just get compiled into CSS files and then put into the app. Or reactive, so you can change your less files and on the fly it will update your UI accordingly. So jQuery, I still leave it in there. I think a lot of applications are actually not using it, but I still think it's useful, so why not have it? Bootstrap 3 for layouting and any UI work. There's a couple of new UI frameworks like Semantic UI coming up, and I just heard that there was some Bootstrap combined with material design. So there's definitely alternatives out there, but Bootstrap 3 has been around for so many years. It's well documented. You have plenty of examples. You have plenty of Stack Overflow questions which explain everything to you. It's the most mature one, and it's been one of the best UI frameworks for years for a reason. Iron rather obvious choice. As long as you don't have a single page application, just use that. Then on the database side, I mentioned already for declaring schemas, the collection 2, collection hooks for the before insert, after delete. You can add additional code. Then publish count. If you want to implement pagination, that is the package to go for. Basically, just offers you in a publication to also set the total amount of items in that collection. So, say you're subscribing only to the top 15 items, or to a page size of 15, but you still want to know how many items there are in total. You don't want to make a separate server call. So, use that one, solves your problem. Meteor aggregate, as soon as you do server-side, it's only server-side package. So aggregation function have been left out of the Mongo driver that's put into Meteor for a very good reason. It's not responsive, obviously. So, I mean, the aggregation can be over the entire data set, which means maybe that responsive would be a performance nightmare. But you might still need it, which is why this package gives you back that functionality. So summing up values, finding the maximum, finding the minimum, all that stuff, very useful. Reactive var is probably a little bit more of a pro tool where you can basically make any variable, even local variables, into reactive variables. On the server side, also HTTP to make HTTP calls to other servers, web service calls, which normally probably you can somehow, I don't know. Only find out that with that it actually works. So Moment.js for date manipulation, parsing dates, formatting dates, and date manipulations, very, very useful. Accounts password for basic authentication, you just have local accounts, and browser policy. I haven't actually documented that in the boilerplate. It can be a little bit tricky from time to time. I found it very tricky to define the proper browser policy if you have third party, like you're calling Google Maps API. If you don't get it to work, you have a little bit of a security leak, but if you can accept that, just remove the package and don't get cross-site scripting alerts in your JavaScript console. And in the optional section, datetime picker, type ahead is a suggest search, basically, file saver, just downloads the file from the server. Meteor git ref I found very useful as well, especially for production applications. I just put a tiny marker in the footer, or maybe discreetly in the header, or even as a template comment, where you can just look at the production environment, look at that section where you know that marker is, and find out which revision is currently deployed. Very, very good for debugging. SAlert is basically just a notification library. You can put notification in every corner of the screen, top, bottom, different styles, can put in HTML, all that stuff. And Font Awesome as a free-to-use, even commercially, icon library. Very good quality, huge selection of icons. I think they have about 400 or so. I usually find something in there. Plus, their handle to use in CSS classes is actually just FA, which is much easier than typing cliff icon, which I always misspell. And so the C3 I already mentioned, the chart library. There's a very good reason for choosing that. So you might think, oh, NVD3 looks much better if you know a little bit about the chart libraries out there. NVD looks much better, yes. Well, not much, but a little bit better. But the way how you declare your graph, your chart, is a little bit more complicated. Where I found C3 has the most intuitive way of doing things. And plus, you can style your graph quite nicely with CSS classes because they're using them extensively. Then Gridster, very use case specific. If you ever want to build some sort of dashboard where you can move tiles around, drag and drop, and resize them, Gridster is the way to go. I had very, very good experience with it. Very easy to get started with. But as I said, it's very use case specific. If you don't need that in your app, then don't add the package. And of course, there's package Google Maps if you want responsive maps. So in case you want a presentation about that, too late. I think that was last time.
So that's what's in your GitHub repository?
So that's what I added in my package file, basically. So I put them in. That's basically just it. Yeah. Okay. So quickly to go through the. We might have 5 more minutes. So this is, for instance, the global helpers file. Just to explain a little bit what it offers you. So it has size of, and you just pass an item to it, and it detects if it's an array or if it's a collection. There should probably be some handling in there for other objects as well. I'm not saying they're finalized. They're just ideas, and they can be refined and adding more and more functionality. And isEmpty is probably could use this one here and basically just make a one-line statement. If the size of is 0, then it's empty. Equals, as I said, couldn't be simpler. You could probably add something where you do stuff like array comparison as well, and I added to that as well. Active class I find very useful for buttons. So if a button is active, you just have the same thing. If A equals B, then add that class. Because otherwise place templates won't let you to add this class like that. And obviously you need to define what active means and which color it's shown in, or if it's highlighted in some way. And last but not least, my CommonJS, my CommonLess file. Basically, this is the one that I mentioned earlier when I have a form element that has this star right next to it. This is just basically what it does. So you just have find here span class required, close the tag, and your star will be rendered. And obviously, typical utility classes like alignment, full width, stuff that you might need eventually. This one here very specific to Bootstrap. So whoever knows Bootstrap, they always add to any col XS6 DOM element, they always add a padding of 15 pixels. If you're just using it for layouting and not for actually rendering some content inside, you want that class. So it just reverts that padding and eliminates it. And then, well, the typical thing, that question has been asked on Stack Overflow probably 1,000 times, and the answers vary as much as well. And so just to explain it for everyone here, the key is this one here. You need to add the display table, otherwise vertical line will not be used. And then obviously you have your button classes, button error classes, which just render everything red. The same for diffs and paragraphs. Then here I have my headings using the brand color and the default border, which are variables which I can customize, which means you can leave that code as is, just change the color in the variables file. Square, probably not too interesting. Oh, that one is a good one. So whenever you have a button, and inside you have some label on the button, but right next to the label you would like to have an icon, right? Using font awesome for that, then CFA, but you need that padding every single time. Instead of putting it in every single view, there it goes. And obviously form validation, if you add the error class you get a border. And this one here I just found the other day. I put it in there. It's a little bit of a gimmick. It's basically saying whenever you change CSS properties of an element, the transition is smooth. So to show you how the boilerplate eventually looks like, this is after I'm logged in. And to show you that transition, I hope you can actually see it. Give me a second. So when I hover over that, it will actually change the color to red.
Yeah, you can see.
Yeah. probably not as good for colors, but I had another example where I had a sidebar, and under certain conditions I just hide the sidebar, and that's the ideal case.
Do it on a font awesome font. So that's impressive.
I could increase the font size
right.
and decrease it again, and the item would just pop up. That's a very valid use case. And for that, I think it belongs
There's
in
your
there.
demo.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm through. Any questions?
Very cool. We're all going to go home tonight and download it. So.
Do you think that Meteor should be offering a lot more of this kind of guidance?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You like the freedom of having a clean slate.
That's what makes Meteor so special, that you're free to do whatever you want. There should be some guide, especially for beginners, and there should also be some sort of exchange between pros where they say, okay, I tried out this, I tried out that worked, that didn't work, you know? The usual thing that you have in every other technology as well, but I don't like where when someone dictates you have to put that file there and it has to contain that, otherwise your app won't work. And I won't tell you why, because you need to read the documentation first. So I think they provide a little bit of guidance. They create those, well, not create, but they declared those folders, the client folder, the server folder, as special. So they already give you sort of a base template. And looking at my Boilerplate, it's not too different from that. So it doesn't deviate too much. I just try to make sense of the folders they gave me and edit what I think was missing. So, but as I said, it's my opinion. Try it out. You might think, Peter must be nuts using that. You know, it's completely useless. Other people will be like, finally, someone thought about me. Yeah. So I think it depends on you, on your style, and also on your application, your use case.
I think the boilerplates make a lot of sense, especially because Meteor doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you also how to structure it, and also what the packages are becoming the standard use, you know?
Yeah.
When I was first learning, I was looking at all the boilerplates going, these are the packages everybody else is using, these are the ones I need.
That's a good one, actually, because of the variety of packages, and usually you also have, for the same functionality, 3 or 4 different. It's not as bad as NPM yet, but it's moving there. I've just recently saw, I can't remember what it was, but 2 packages, different authors, they were completely identical. And I was like, why? Right. And one is rated very, very high, and the other one just has 20 downloads. I'm like,
Well, that's my guide though, I'm going,
yeah, you will also pick those packages that have more than 1,000 downloads, right? Yeah, exactly. But
wisdom of the crowd.
yeah, but
It doesn't always work, but I'm sure.
especially with new
It's
upcoming
where to
packages.
start.
But I understand what you said earlier, where you said there's so many packages out there. There needs to be some sort of guideline of saying, okay, this is used in 60% of all projects, or this is like Iron Router. You know, if you're new to Meteor, you might not really. Actually, I think they mentioned it on the Meteor documentation. Maybe Iron Router is a bad example, but there's others where you're just saying, okay, what do I use? Or is there a package? Is there even a package out there that already solves that for me? I mean, for instance, the aggregation package for the server side. Well, I could just go to the server and download, basically pull all the data from the database, iterate through it, heavy computation on the server side, and then get my result. I mean, I can achieve that. But there's a package already out there which just offers you the normal Mongo aggregations, and, well, my code just gets so much smaller, and I let the database handle it, which is optimized to do that. So, yeah, why should I do it on the in my own code and write code that I don't need? I think that's also the beauty about Meteor, where 80% of the things that you want to do are easier than before, but it's those 20%, for instance, aggregation, where they would normally get harder, but those gaps where functionality is missing, they're getting filled by packages, and just very important to figure out which packages fill which gap.